Hello everyone and welcome to the second game of the semifinals of the FIDE Grand Prix in Berlin. In this game we'll have a look at the game between Richard Rapport and Hikaru Nakamura. Now Hikaru won his game yesterday, so a draw would be enough to move on to the final, probably against Levan, who won his game yesterday with the white pieces against Lenier Dominguez. Alright, so Rapport opened up with knight f3, Hikaru sticking to his guns with d5 and g3 by Richard. Now usually Hikaru plays the move g6 here, and after bishop g2, bishop g7. White has two options here. White can play d4 and it turns into a symmetrical Grunfeld. I mean, black usually plays knight f6, castles, castles, and after c4 black can take this pawn or be very solid with the move c6. Now this is what Hikaru usually does, but in this game he decides to do something a bit different. He goes for knight f6, bishop g2 and e6. And in this line after castles, bishop e7, white could choose to transpose back into the Catalan after d4, castles and c4. This is the system Hikaru usually uses with the bishop on e7, but Richard goes for a different approach. He goes for d3, and after castles, knight bd2. Now the idea behind this setup is that if black goes c5, white wants to go e4, and this is called the King's Indian attack. Right, so usually black follows up with knight c6, white goes e5, knight d7 and rook e1. And even though black is completely fine here, white usually is going to launch a big attack on the black king. Play usually continues something like b5, white goes h4, a5, both sides pushing on different sides of the board. b4, white goes h5 or something, h6, bishop comes to f4, knight h2, knight g4, all looking very, very dangerous. And actually, Sergei Karyakin, when he was in a must-win situation against Sam Shankland at the FIDE World Cup, he used this line and he managed to strike back. So Hikaru apparently on stream said that why would Sam Shankland ever go into this? Why did he not just play knight c6? So I felt like, okay, if I say that and then I don't, stick to my word and I play c5, then that's not very consistent, right? So he played the move knight c6. Now the point behind knight c6 is to play e5 in one go. It does have a drawback though, which is that you block the move c5 from yourself. So here white could play e4, but black is generally very solid. I think black takes on e4 and then plays something along the lines of e5. The position is symmetrical and black is generally very solid. So Richard went for something else. He played the move d4. And you might be thinking like, wait, why would he go d3 and then d4, right? That doesn't make any sense. But the idea behind going d4 here is that black has put his knight on c6 already. So black cannot play the move c5 and put pressure on white's center. So what did Hikaru do? He played knight e4, putting a knight in the center. Now, taking on e4 is not really good because black takes, you hit the knight, and then e4 comes under pressure. So Richard played c3, strengthening his center first, and here Hikaru played the move f5, strengthening the knight on e4. Now, here Richard came up with a nice maneuver. He played knight e1. So if white gets a couple moves here, what white wants to do is go knight at d3. Let's just illustrate. Let's say black goes here, we go knight at d3. Bishop f6 and knight f3. The bishop can come out at f4, and white has quite nice control over the e5 square. So what did Hikaru do? Before Richard was able to take control fully over the square, he played e5 himself. So Richard played knight df3, bishop f6 by Hikaru, putting pressure on the pawn on d4, and Richard played e3, strengthening the pawn on d4. And here the position is not that easy for Hikaru because there's a lot of tension in the center. But if you take on d4, this really helps white, because white's going to take with the pawn. This bishop can now come out at f4, the knight's going to come out at d3, and white has quite a pleasant advantage. So Hikaru didn't want to go into that, so instead he played the move b6, because he also needs to develop this bishop. Richard played knight at d3, once again trading only favors white, so Hikaru played rook to e8. And the main reason why trading favors white is that this bishop on c1 comes to life. This is really white's main problem, right? Like, how are you ever going to bring this bishop into the game? Right, you cannot go b3 at the moment because you hang the pawn on c3, and otherwise it's just kind of stuck behind these pawns. So what white probably should have done in this position is trade everything on e5, and once this position arises, white goes queen to c2, b3, bishop b2, and c4. And maybe white can hope for a small advantage because white has the two bishops. But the thing that's always difficult for white is that this bishop on g2 is blocked by this knight on e4, right? So, so white has two bishops, but the bishops are not too active just yet. So Richard played rook to e1, Hikaru played bishop to a6, and here Richard probably made a big positional mistake. He should have taken on e5 anyway, and then after this whole trade, still go for this idea with b3, bishop e2, and c4, trying to play on the long diagonal. But Richard went for a different approach. He played bishop h3. Now bishop h3, it looks like a very odd move, but it has some point to it. If after bishop h3, black goes g6, this whole trade on e5 becomes much better for white. Because in this position, after b3, if this diagonal ever opens up, the black king is going to feel very unsafe. Let's just make a couple moves. Let's say this rook drops back, we go bishop e2, and after c6, white could play something like queen to d4, and after c4, white has checkmating ideas on this long diagonal. So that was really Richard's idea behind the move bishop h3. However, the drawback is that Hikaru now parted with his light square bishop. We saw in these lines that white would get some pressure along the long diagonal, right? So Hikaru gave up the light square bishop, and after queen takes, now queen to d7. And if white ever takes an e5 here, then after bishop takes, this idea of b3 is completely ruled out because this bishop is controlling the long diagonal. So Richard played rook to d1. He's trying to hit the pawn on d5, so Hikaru played rook a8, defending the pawn. b4 by Richie, he wants to go b5, but it doesn't really threaten too much. So Hikaru just played a queen to e6, and after b5, knight a5. Now here we have a funny situation. Richard took on e5 and Hikaru recaptured. And if white takes, white has the two bishops, but this bishop on h3 is kind of blocked in. This knight on e4 is very, very strong. This bishop on c1 is also very, very passive. So white doesn't really have any advantage whatsoever. So Richard played knight to d4, hitting the queen, and Hikaru played queen h6, hitting the bishop on h3. Now you cannot take the pawn on f5, because if you do so, black is going to sacrifice over here. He's hitting the queen and the rook, so you cannot ignore the sacrifice. But if you take, black's going to take here, and white's in a lot of trouble. Because after king f1, at the very least, black could make a draw and move on. Because if you go anywhere else, you get checkmated. So taking the pawn was not an option. Instead of that, Richard played bishop to g2, and now Hikaru moved the queen back to f6. Alright, so a4 by Richie. And here, quite a surprising decision by Hikaru. He traded on d4, and after Richard recaptured, he played a very nice move. He played c5. Now here, things are not easy for white, because you cannot take this pawn, because you hang your rook in the corner. And if you ignore it with a move like bishop a3, black's going to go c4 and create a protected passer over here. The knight could jump to b3 any moment, and black is just doing great here. Once again, there's nothing white can do. So Richard saw himself forced to take en passant. As we all know, en passant is forced. And so Hikaru recaptured, and Richard played bishop d2, but now knight c4. Once again, look at these knights. They're completely neutralizing the bishops. Black is much better. Rook dc1, rook c8 by Hikaru. Here, black cannot take on d2. This would be a huge positional mistake, because you give up your active knight for the passive bishop. And after white takes, after rook takes c6, this pawn on d5 is always going to be very weak, and here white is a lot better. So black should not do that, but instead he went rook to c8, and after bishop e1 he moved the queen over to e6. Now here it's once again really difficult for Richard to come up with a move. He played rook cb1. He wants to play the move a5 and try to put pressure on the queen side, so Hikaru played the move a6. And if white ever plays a5 now black can keep things close with b5. This knight on c4 becomes even more solidified. So Richie played rook to b3, but Hikaru played rook to c6, making sure this is always protected. Rook a b1, and Hikaru played the move g5. And here the position is looking very comfortable for black. There's nothing really white can do. And in this position, after move 30, Hikaru offered a draw. The rules stipulate that you cannot offer a draw before black's 30th move, so this was the earliest moment in the game where it actually was possible. And Hikaru felt like, okay, my position should be better, but with a draw I move on to the next round. To be honest, I was quite surprised that Richie just took the draw. He could have played on for a bit longer, and let's say things would get really out of control. Then maybe he could offer a draw and Hikaru would probably still take it, because it makes you move on to the next stage. But yeah, overall, a really good game by Hikaru, who draws with the black pieces against Richard Rapport and moves on to the final of the FIDE Grand Prix in Berlin against Slovan Aronian. So that's going to be very, very exciting. So I hope you all will tune in for that. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next one.